everyone, and welcome back to Like and Hood Reads. My name's Michaela, and I'm coming at you today with a review of The Daughters of Izdihar. The Daughters of Izdihar is an epic fantasy debut that came out back in January. It is Egyptian-inspired. It has an elemental magic system reminiscent of Avatar: The Last Airbender, and it also has a Sapphic POV character. So, of course, this book was on my anticipated queer sci-fi and fantasy books for 2023. I've been looking forward to it for quite a while. I'm not sure when I first heard about it, but as soon as I saw this cover, I knew I had to have it, especially with a description like that. I have to say, going into this book, I had very different expectations from what the book actually turned out to be, but I still ended up really enjoying it anyway. Just from the description, it kind of led me to believe some things that turned out to be not as big a deal as others and kind of downplayed other aspects of the story. So a lot of what this review is going to be is just me sort of clarifying what I feel like the synopsis doesn't get quite right and letting you guys know what I really enjoyed most about this book. The Daughters of Izdihar is supposed to be the first in a duology, so yippee for a short, not standalone necessarily, but shorter fantasy series that aren't like 3, 5, 15 books long, am I right? The Daughters of Izdihar takes place in an Egyptian-inspired fantasy world, so it's not supposed to be Egypt necessarily, it's just sort of based off the author's experiences growing up. I believe the author is Egyptian, so it's based off of her home country, and just, you sort of get the vibes that are there, but it doesn't take place in Egypt. So one of the biggest story elements to this book is a women's suffrage movement that the two main characters get caught up in this fight for women's rights. This feels not only extremely relevant to the current time period, but it feels sort of reminiscent of like what was going on in the early 20th century. Not necessarily in Egypt, but here in the United States. There are protests and riots and demonstrations and things like that. There's also this sort of element where the government feels very present. They have like a parliament, they have like a police station and a police chief. So there are a lot of things about this book that felt more grounded sort of in reality rather than in a sort of fantastical fantasy world. But there are a lot of fantasy elements, most notably the magic system, which is elemental. And I was pleasantly surprised by the magic system because I feel like the synopsis kind of downplays the magic. Like, it hints that there might be a forbidden elemental magic, but it doesn't say that this elemental magic is a huge part of their society. There are a lot of magic users present in the book, in their society, and it's actually a big point of political contention going into this political climate that the book takes place in. But it's also incredibly exciting. So both of the main POV characters are magic users. One of them is an earth elemental magic user and the other one is a water elemental magic user. And it's really fun to come at this book and see how they each kind of approach their powers, like how they feel about these abilities, how they use them. One of them sort of views it as, you know, this empowering thing that's gonna change her life, that she wants to sort of be defined by as being an elemental magic user, whereas the other one is more fearful of her magic and sort of does whatever she can to suppress it or hide it. She hardly uses it at all, and she mostly thinks of it as a burden, if not even a curse. The two POV main characters are extremely different, and of course, just given the synopsis, I went into it thinking that the love plot of the story, the romance plot, would be between the two main POV characters, and I want to go ahead and dissuade that expectation. That is not the case. So often that is the case where the two main POVs are falling in love with each other, and that's not what's happening. So, but in a good way. So one of the main characters is a sort of poor working class girl. She works in a bookshop, which girls in bookshops. She comes from a family with a lot of daughters. They're not very well off, they're not very wealthy, and her entire family has to work. Her sisters work in these awful factories where they're mistreated, where people get injured a lot, you know. Despite having grown up in this poor environment, the bookshop worker, Georgina, she is actually extremely studious and very well educated, they do have a public education system, but you get the sense that she is mostly self-educated, and she has this passion for history and study and just academics in general. Whereas the other POV character, Nahal, she is a rich daughter of a sort of aristocrat in the society. Her family is very important. However, they're in the middle of a little bit of a scandal because her father is in massive debt due to gambling, apparently. And so even though her family is very well off and they are very powerful in this world, they are having a bit of a rough patch themselves, which leads to Nahal being engaged to be married. Her parents set up an arranged marriage with another very influential family, and she is essentially being traded in for her father's reputation and to pay off his gambling debts, which in the society, both Nahal and Georgina are defined by who they're going to marry or their ability to marry, their eligibility, their reputation. This is all extremely important to women in this society because in this world, you can expect all of the sexist, misogynistic laws and customs to be in place, arranged marriages. Women don't have any rights for themselves. They always have to be sort of accompanied by a male guardian of some sort, be it their father, their brother, their husband, whatever. They don't have any rights to do anything by themselves, pretty much. They can't own property, they can't even work for themselves. And you can expect a lot of that going into this book. You can expect to deal with a lot of that sort of BS, where it's like, your husband should keep you home, and who let you out, and restrain your wife, and those sort of things. So part of this book was extremely frustrating in that regard, in a good way though. It sucks you into the world, and it really sucks you into the characters' experiences and what they're dealing with on a daily basis, and what sort of leads to their inability to handle it anymore, right? This what's driving them individually to their breaking points. Popping back in here really quick just to say something that I sort of somehow forgot to mention in this original take was that one of the main themes of this book is an underlying tension of female rage, something that I think we've talked a lot about in the last several years in fiction and media and reality as well. But it's very important that these two main characters have a lot to dislike about each other, and there's a lot that they don't have in common, but they are connected and they are sort of brought together into this suffrage movement, into this revolution by their shared female rage, and it's a constant state of female rage in this book. It's a theme that's underlying every scene, every moment. It's that feeling when you hear, some off-putting phrase or some offhanded comment, or when you're being hit on or groped or belittled or interrupted, when you're being told, no, you can't have the things you want, or you don't deserve the things you want, or you're not worthy of those things because you're a woman. All of these sort of feelings that are constantly underlining, I think it's something that every woman alive can probably relate to, some more than others, certainly. But from the very beginning of civilization, right, it's something we've all shared. It's just this seething, not only resentment, but just this inability to take only so much of that sort of behavior before you sort of boil over, right? In these patriarchal societies, it's just a constant underlining current of every woman's life, I think. Some more than others, but we've all felt it before. And these two characters are both struggling with it in different ways, and a big part of the book and a big part of the contrast between these characters is seeing the way they handle their rage differently, how they handle this seething differently, and how they both ultimately will boil over, and how even though all the things they don't have in common, all the reasons they have not to like each other, this is something they do have in common. This is something that bonds them together for a single cause and in a single sort of solidarity that is very important to the development of their relationship in the book and to their relationship dynamic. Because there's only so far you can push people, and this book is about that. It's about how far these characters can be pushed, how much can be taken away from them, how many times they can be told no, or could be belittled or mistreated in whatever way before they finally have to do something about it. And that's something I really loved about this book. You know, there have been several really good movies about this recently. I'm mostly thinking of Promising Young Woman that came out, I believe, last year in 2022. It's very different. It's not fantasy or anything like that, but it just the constant suppression of female rage in our society, and I think this book is exploring that same feeling, a very similar feeling of just injustice and the need to do something about it, and the need that rage is always going to find a way out eventually, in some very unfortunate ways sometimes. And I think that is something I really enjoyed about the book, is that underlying tension that's underneath every scene in this book, every word that's spoken, every argument, every protest. It all comes back to that, I think. So if you enjoy those sort of stories, if you enjoy those sort of discussions, you're definitely going to find that here in this book. And they both live very different lives. Like I said, Georgina is coming from a place of poverty, from a working class, like desperate inability to any upward mobility. The only way for her to dig herself and her family out of poverty is to somehow marry well. And Nahal is coming from a place of a lot of privilege, despite what's going on with her family and despite her lack of rights. She's still coming from a place, a very privileged place in society, even with all of the issues that she has. She still can't do anything without her parents' permission, and of course what she wants to do more than anything is go train at the Elemental Magic Academy that has just opened up in the city that they live in. So yes, there is a sliver of magical school in there. We don't get to spend a whole lot of time at the school, so don't get super excited, but there is a magical school that Nahal is trying to get into, but of course she can't get into it without her father or her new husband's permission. So I don't want to give away too much of the plot of what's going on, but I will say that the Sapphic plot line is a sort of B romantic plot. It takes place between one of the POV characters and a side character who, do I want to say? I'm not gonna say. It's a side character, side romantic B plot. Romance is not the main. Don't come here for the romance. That's not what it's about. There are side romance plots, but the main plot of this book is about Georgina and Nahal and sort of how they are coming to their breaking points within the society due to a series of unfortunate events. And there is a lot of political undercurrent in this book too, because of the suffrage movement. I would say the suffrage movement takes center stage in the plot, where this society has sort of been boiling up to this point of women's rights. It's getting more and more violent, more and more desperate. There's a lot of contention going on. It's kind of ripping families apart. It's ripping the city apart. And that is where the majority of the plot is held. So if you're not into that sort of political, revolutionary, protesting, being told no a million times until finally you can't take it anymore sort of thing, that's not going to be for you. But I ended up really enjoying this book. I ended up flying through it once I got like maybe a quarter of the way through. I just could not stop reading. And the ending, it is a duology, so the ending ends on a cliffhanger. It's a rough one too, for sure. But I really ended up enjoying it. This story is exploring all sorts of avenues of oppression and the sort of different levels of oppression. As I said, Nahal is coming from a place of relative privilege, even as a woman who doesn't have any individual rights herself, just because of her influential family and her family's reputation. She is warranted a certain amount of privilege over someone like Georgina, who is just living by the scrapes of her teeth, and who is basically threatened with destitution or death at any given moment. She's just not someone who the society cares about at all. But it also explores things like what it's like to be queer in a society like this, both Sapphic and from a gay male perspective of a side character that we get in this story. And that was a pleasant surprise. Like, it's not just talking about wealth disparity, it's not just talking about women's rights, it's talking about a whole range of the ways in which society is just ignoring and just abusing so many people, so many demographics. So I think this book is fantastic. It's not like anything I've read before, I don't think. The elemental magic element was a very pleasant surprise. I thought it was going to be a more minor part of this book, but it's a major part of it. It's a major part of our two main characters' identities, especially in the Hall, who hopes that it's going to be her ticket out of her situation, her ticket to power, which is what she craves more than anything, is just autonomy, right? And the magic system, I can't help but think of Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's not super martial arty like Avatar: The Last Airbender is, but other than that, it is pretty much. They even have the concept of an avatar, of someone in their history that caused a lot of trouble and kind of contributed to a lot of the political controversy surrounding the magic users in this book, is because of a historical figure that is essentially an avatar. It was someone that had the ability to control all of the elements instead of just one, like all the other magic users in this book can. So you have it's definitely drawing on that sort of thing. Not that Avatar has a claim to all elemental magics, just that the whole time I was reading it, and anytime the magic system would come up, I couldn't help but think of that, and of course that made me giddy because I love Avatar. I think we all probably do. But there is a lot to love in this book, and I can't wait for the sequel. The cliffhanger at the end is guttural. I think I went into this book expecting it to be a little bit like Tasha Shuri's The Burning Kingdoms, so that's the Jasmine Throne and the Oleander Sword. I just read the Oleander Sword last year, so it was kind of at the forefront of my mind, and especially when I was making anticipated reading lists for this year, and so I kept thinking that this would be a little bit like that, and it's not in a pleasant way. It's quite different. The Oleander Sword and the Jasmine Throne are very epic in scale. It is, sure enough, a fantasy world, an epic fantasy world. There are epic military battles and, crazy ancient magic and stuff like that. And this book is less so about that. This book is very urban. It takes place in a city with all of the goods and bads that implies. There's squalor, there are brothels, there is rioting, there's robbery, there's a police station. This book just felt a little more grounded, a little closer to reality than something as epic as The Burning Kingdoms, and I appreciated that. It just felt really close to home, especially the political unrest that's going on feels more modern than something like an epic fantasy political unrest would, because it's not an epic rebellion with there's not a lot of action, there's not a lot of battles, right? A lot of what's going on here is just sort of everyday street violence, right? Protests and riots and police brutality is something that is addressed in this book, and I just found all of that extremely fascinating and extremely refreshing in a fantasy book. So I felt like I hadn't really read anything in this particular vein before, which is, of course, exciting. So I would highly recommend it. I don't really do star ratings, but I think on Goodreads I gave this 4 stars. I really liked it, and I'm really looking forward to the sequel. I think this would fit really well in the ranks of those Sapphic trifecta books that came out in 2021. I wish we had a Sapphic trifecta every year, and if so, this would definitely be one of them. There are a lot of exciting queer books coming out this year. This is just the first of many, and one of my first, favorite reads of the year. So check it out.